Hi, folks. Welcome to our weekly live history chats. Thanks for joining me again. I just posted a little link in the comments section that we'll be talking about today. Just making sure that it came up properly. It looks like it did. Uh, uh, this this topic for this week. Thanks again for supporting this project and tuning in. I'm, as always, thankful for all the wonderful story ideas and topic ideas. Um, and this week's actually came about as a couple months ago, I was searching through old newspapers, looking for something else, and I came across, and I had forgotten that this year was a leap year. Leap day is this week. And that February 29th, every 4 years, that we add a day to keep up with the rotation of the Earth and make sure that our calendar matches the quirky little calendar that we have. Um, so we can Google the reasons why we do all the leap year. That explanation I'll leave for you to be able to research yourself if you're interested in that. But what I found fascinating, I thought, oh, leap year. There's got to be something intriguing historically, locally, about leap year. And as I was searching, so I just started searching for leap year, seeing if there's any topics. I was mostly interested in any local babies who were born on February 29th. You'll often hear that in the news where they'll interview somebody who, only celebrates their quote unquote birthday every 4 years. I found a couple of those as I was researching through the newspapers. And if you want to read the article, I talk about that, how in the little personals columns, they talk about local children who are, celebrating their 12th birthday, which is actually um, only their third birthday if you consider it's every 4 years. But one of the most intriguing parts of leap year day that I found, I had never heard of before, and I had actually asked somebody as I talk quite a bit about people, some friends of mine who are approaching 90, 100 years old, and I'll often ask them. They're probably getting sick of me asking so many questions, but ask them about this. And in the newspaper, I saw that there was references to the leap year day and marriage proposals, and women being able to ask the men on dates to marry them. There was even one, as I just did a digital search for leap day or leap year in the newspaper, and year after year I was finding references to what turned out to be an old Irish tradition, custom that goes way back, and I talk about that in the article, but that we were still talking about it in modern times. And so I first started researching in the Easter Advertiser, and then I started looking into some Buffalo newspapers, and it was mentioned quite a bit, and it was this Sadie Hawkins style of leap year, and that leap year, not only the day, it started out as the day, going back into this Irish tradition where on that one day, February 29th, every 4 years, a woman could ask a man to marry them. And if the man refused, then in some places by law, but mostly just custom and tradition, the man would have to pay the woman either through jewelry or clothing or actual money. That was the custom. Some historians sort of haven't really verified the origins of the story, but nonetheless, it was popping up in our newspapers here in East Aurora. Actually, I was looking through the Advertiser at first, but then I decided to go back into the Aurora Standard, which was our first newspaper published back in the 1830s, and it was only published for 4 years, this newspaper, and it just happened to be that 1836 was one of the years that the newspaper published. I believe it was 1836. And there was a reference to it, and it said, bachelors need to look out, and women need to be, you know, going out there and proposing marriage. And of course, it's tongue in cheek, especially here in the United States. But that was as early as the 1830s that this tradition had made its way to the United States and here to East Aurora. That they were at least talking about it. You get to the late 1800s, and there were actually dances and social events that revolved around this leap day idea. And again, it started out as just that one day, and then it sort of, from what I could tell, encapsulated the whole year. So starting in January, the newspaper would be saying, men, bachelors, tread lightly because it's now time for the women to be able to come ask you to marry them. And that would start in January of any leap year. So there would be dances. There was one at the Roycroft, the school organizations at the school. There was a sororities. There were sororities at the high school. One in particular. Yes, there were sororities in the high school. And if you ask older folks who went to East Aurora High School, they'll remember the sororities that were there. They sponsored a dance where the girls could ask the boys to the dance, and the theme was leap year. Um, so I had never heard of this before, and I asked several people who are around my generation, and they hadn't either. And so this went on through the 30s, and there'd be a basketball game, and then the dance afterwards, and it was a Sadie Hawkins style dance, and a lot of us remember Sadie Hawkins dances. We had Sadie Hawkins dances when I was in high school, but they weren't associated with leap year or leap day. It was just a Sadie Hawkins dance where the girls could ask the boys. So why don't we hear about it much anymore? Well, I think the tide turned in around World War II. And I noticed, and I talk about it in the article a little bit, as I noticed, and I couldn't uh, go into detail about this because I don't have enough space. So that's why I love to be able to have these discussions to kind of share some of the things that ended up on the, proverbial cutting room floor. But um, there was an editorial in the high school newspaper, East Aurora High School newspaper, and a young woman wrote this, basically saying that we needed to get rid of this leap year, leap day tradition because women should be equal. They're told they're equal, uh, but then we have still have hold on to these traditions where the girls can only ask boys to a dance on in during a leap year or on a leap day. And, we might think that this isn't no big deal. Like, oh, it's just a silly little tradition. And what's the harm of a leap year dance where the girls get to ask the boys? Well, the stereotype was out there that because we were a lot, encouraging the girls to ask boys on that one day or that one year, that it was perpetuating this tradition that and uh, this tradition that boys could only do the asking, could only ask girls out, and the girls couldn't do it. And this was a thing. Like the boys were expected to be the ones to ask, and if a girl liked a boy, they they would be looked down upon. It was not proper for a girl to ask a boy out on a date. And this young woman in this essay, this editorial in the high school newspaper, pointed that out. If we're equal, why are we relegated to leap year being able to ask boys out on a date? And that makes wow, yeah, and a girl could ask a boy on a date. There was, no law against it by this point. Women could ask men to marry them. They could do the proposing. Um, uh, but society looked down on it, and that was her point. And we still do in many respects. The men traditionally ask women to marry them, and why? And they were asking good questions. The following week, which I found even more interesting, in the next week's high school newspaper, uh, a young man wrote a response to the editorial that was written by the young woman the week before, saying, "Yeah, we would love it if the roles were turned around permanently. We wouldn't mind if girls asked a boy out on a date or asked them to a dance, any dance, whether it's leap year or not." Um, and I think the timing of this was interesting. And of course, we still struggle with those stereotypes and those traditions of male and female and who gets to ask out whom to a dance. And the idea that a Sadie Hawkins dance could still be a thing, that the girls have to be given, some sort of special permission in order to ask a boy out to a dance or out on a date. Hopefully, that's not as prevalent as it was. But this timing of this was early 1940s, and this was around World War II. And my theory is the same thing happened in World War I, is that men were going off to war, and women were taking on roles that were traditionally held by men. They were entering the workforce, and wrote about this about World War II, how there was a controversy during World War II when women were stepping up to work outside the home. They were learning auto mechanics. There were classes for women to learn auto mechanics and and work in factories. Women weren't traditionally allowed to do that, or whether legally or just from a tradition standpoint. And there was a huge controversy. People were uncomfortable with women working outside the home, even when they were stepping up during the war. This happened during World War I, too. Women were stepping up into traditionally male roles. As a result of that, women were first, I think, demanding more representation and changes in how society looked at the role of women. And you'll notice this during World War I. 1915 in New York State, there was a statewide vote for women's suffrage, whether to allow women the right to vote in New York State. Of course, we always think of 1920 when it became federal, a constitutional amendment. But in New York, we voted first. And 1915, of course, the men were voting on whether or not to allow women to vote. Uh, Men voted against women being allowed to vote in 1915, before we had gotten involved in World War One. 2 years later, 1917, we were becoming involved in World War One. In 1917 and 1918, women's roles changed. Women were stepping up, and more men, I think, saw the role of women and how they should be able to vote. Of course, they should be able to vote, and so that the attitude toward women's position in politics changed because of their role in World War One. I think the same thing was happening in World War II. Women were stepping up and being viewed differently. Their role in politics, their role in representation in business. Women were stepping up in jobs outside of the home and proving that they could do it, and our views of women were changing. The view of the woman being the homemaker at home and the man working changed out of necessity because of the war. And I think that spilled over into some of the societal traditions, including this leap year tradition that I had never even heard of as a person living in 2024. Um, and I think that's what changed it a bit. The young women, especially, were saying, wait a minute, you're telling us we're equal. We have the right to vote. We're seen as equal. And of course, we know that women weren't necessarily seen as equal in many instances, even after that. My mother, for instance, couldn't get a credit card without my father's approval or open a bank account into the 1970s. Um, but I think that the young women, especially the person who wrote this great editorial in the high school newspaper, is saying that it's hypocritical to say on one hand that women are to be treated equally, but then we have this, what they said, a silly tradition. And you may see it silly, and it's just, it's not meant to be taken seriously. But the message that it sends was that young women are only allowed to ask boys out during leap year. So I think that's where I don't see that tradition happening after World War II when you do a search in the newspapers, and I think it kind of died out during that period of time. And because the role changed, there were still traditions associated with Leap Day. There were a lot of organizations would have use it as an excuse to have a fundraiser or have a social or have a roast beef dinner. I don't see that happening today. I don't see this as a leap day as a holiday with which we don't have a leap day dance or a leap year dance or a leap day dinner. I don't see that as much anymore. But it really was something that people used as an excuse to have a party or have a fundraiser. So I do believe that tradition, something I wasn't able to talk too much about in the column as much as I wanted to, that tradition of that Sadie Hawkins idea of women being only able to ask men to marry them. And this went even as far, I noted in the article of someone inquired of the town clerk of whether there were more marriage licenses issued during that leap year. than in other years, and they didn't see any difference. So it just seemed like it was a tongue-in-cheek sort of tradition that was referenced every 4 years in the newspaper. But it took some high school students in their editorial pages of their high school newspaper to tell us that even if it is tongue-in-cheek, it's still sending a very bad message about women's equality and the equality of the sexes, and you can't be saying one thing and doing another. So I thought that was very, very interesting back in World War II period of time. So just a neat part of our local history that I stumbled upon as I was looking for something else. So if you haven't already, take a look at the article on the advertiser's website. I'll be posting more this week about it as we approach the Leap Day on February 29th, which only happens once every 4 years, as you know. Um, and some of us just seem to pass by it without even thinking, but it was a big deal back 100 years ago. They would make a big deal of the approach of Leap Day. Um, and thanks again for listening. As always, keep your comments coming. Got some great ideas. I promise they're in the hopper. I have a couple weather-related topics that people have asked about, but this weather we're having, it's all winter weather and about ice and snow, and we haven't had ice and snow. So it's been pretty warm. So I've been holding off, but I might just have to do it regardless of what the weather outside is like. But again, thank you for listening. Thanks for keeping history alive. Please place your comments or either in the comment section or send me a private message if you want to give me a topic idea or any feedback. And again, one thing I always like to point out, you're allowed to disagree with me. I love when people point out maybe something that I said was incorrect or you see it a little differently. I'd love to hear your comments about that as well. So again, thanks for keeping history alive, and we'll see you next time here at our local history chats. Thanks for listening. See you soon.